Well, thanks for joining this conversation. This is a melding of the minds, I think. We have an international management class from MBA program, or some of you might be master's programs at University of Texas at Dallas. And so we're in a group together to try to understand international talent, international hiring. And so the whole point of the class is to get a more diverse, broad perspective on just the global workforce, global business, what that looks like today. And so we have signed on the illustrious Bret Starr to help us understand how to hire, how to do talent management within today's global organization. So Bret is the CEO of the Starr Conspiracy, which is a marketing agency, a B2B marketing agency. I work for the Starr Conspiracy. So I've worked with Bret for a number of years, and I have seen his leadership. I've seen his talent management practices. So I'm excited to share him with y'all and have a good conversation. We have a lot of nationalities represented on this call. People from Serbia, Colombia, Cuba, Guatemala, and of course, America. As part of this whole group. And so we have a lot of different perspectives. And so we'll just be asking Bret some questions. And Bret, you just shoot from the hip. Just let us know what you think.
Sounds good to me. I'm really happy to be here. Right. Obviously, I'm a very put together individual. So you're really hearing some important stuff today.
First, I want to hear a little of your journey of hiring international talent. Hey, Shreya, it's good to see you. I want to hear a little bit of your journey hiring international talent and managing international talent as well. The Starr Conspiracy has a lot of clients all over the world and has had employees all over the world as well. I mean, Greece, Canada, now Latin America. We have some employees in Chile. And so I want to hear your journey through that process over the years, and then some of the biggest challenges you faced, as well as some ways that you overcame them. And then where you see the future going as far as talent practices, with remote work or hybrid work, or how digital environments have changed the game. So just a little bit about your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot to unpack across all of those topics. We're growing quickly, and about a year ago, I started to investigate a more significant way to find people to work with all around the world, as opposed to kind of the typical cadence of, hey, do you know anybody that wants a job? Let's put some posts on LinkedIn or advertise on job boards or whatever. And I wanted to be more intentional about the way that we build our culture over time. And there's just so many reasons why I really wanted to expand our search for what we call the hiring experience. We wanted to get more people involved in the hiring experience. A lot of it's rooted in our purpose and our vision, and our purpose is to create abundance. And, the question always comes up, well, for whom? And it's not enough to, in service of our purpose to create abundance for just us. Or for just, the people that we know, but, expanding the opportunity to create abundance for as many people as possible, which is driving a lot of the decisions that we make. And one of the things that was very clear to me is that, the ability to drive a more, kind of diverse world perspective inside an organization can't be achieved by hiring exclusively in the country where you're doing business, like in our case, the United States, and that the diversity of thought that comes from people who've had radically different life experiences really, in a creative industry like the one that we're in, just really makes us a lot, more effective and creative. Because we have so many different perspectives going into the work that we do, the questions that we ask, and just hearing stories about different people's life experiences, especially during COVID, I think gives people a broader sense of awareness about, how things are different, all over the place. And so I definitely wanted, to pursue folks outside of the United States for that reason. But also, as an evil capitalist, there's just a selfish goal that I had, which is when you start interviewing people in other countries, what you often find is that the level of education and talent is so high, and that the opportunities to apply that in a professional context are pretty low. And so when we first started hiring in South America, for instance, in like Chile and Argentina and Brazil and stuff like that, we were talking to people who had multiple advanced degrees, PhDs, MBAs, master's degrees, this really extensive educational backgrounds, but they had also worked in really, cool places, big consulting shops, et cetera. But their ability to flow between, different kinds of companies can sometimes be limited, and the opportunities can be limiting in the specific country that they're in. And so I was just really amazed by the just quality level of talent. And so being able to become agile around hiring people outside your own country can also just increase the talent pool that you're drawing from, and increase the talent that you have access to. Some of the folks that we've hired in, I think of Ryan, for instance, Brandon, who's like, I think her master's is in like astrophysics. How do you say that? Astrophysics. She's an astrophysicist. And, I think she also went to the University of Chicago and just, has this incredible background. And, in the U.S., it's very hard to sell an employer, value proposition to folks who have the labor market so tight here. That's obviously, an incredible background. And it's hard for us as a, 70 or 80 person company to, kind of beat McKinsey, or beat, insert big, consulting house here. And so selfishly, I was just really drawn to the level of talent that exists outside the United States. So there was that goal of like diversity of thought, but also true diversity, equity, and inclusion to expand our worldview. There was also just the high level of talent that we were able to find. And I think, and this is where the conversation always gets really interesting. Most of the time when, you're in the United States and you're talking to people about recruiting people outside of the U.S., everybody thinks that you're doing it to save money. And the reality is that it's very expensive to hire people in other countries if you're doing it the right way. And I've got a lot of opinions about the right way, and I'll talk a little bit about what I discovered as we were going through this process. And we had a team of people working on it. But most of the time, when you want to go out and develop an offshore source of labor, or all those words that I hate to use, you get a lot of advice, and all that advice is guiding you in the direction of like how to save money. And so most of the time, the first thing because I've started by just reaching out to a bunch of people that I know who have global workforces, and I wanted to ask, how to do it, and what they learned, and what were the mistakes they made and the things they got right. And you get a wide range of responses, but everyone always assumes that you're doing it to save money. And so most people recommend that you work with an organization and just kind of contract labor outside of that organization. And I knew immediately, because of the way that we work at the Starr Conspiracy, that was not an option for us. I didn't want to, be one client out of 5 clients for the people who are working with us. We have a day structure that requires people be in a company-wide check-in. We have a 3-day weekend, and we've got big blocks of quiet time, which means that the amount of time that's available for people to actually collaborate is difficult to find. And we're working on that, but it's difficult to find. And that means that you have to be available in the flow of work. We can't just, send off a project to someone and, kind of get it the next day and then send it back and, all that stuff. We work much faster than that. So that was not really an option for me. I really wanted to have the Starr Conspiracy people, in whatever countries we decided to work in. And I also wanted them to be completely part of our culture. And I wanted them to experience the same quality of life and the same quality of work experience of people who live in Texas or in, Portland, Oregon, or, whatever. And so that part was very important to me. So then you start saying, okay, I want to hire my own people in Chile. I want to hire my own people in Colombia, in Canada, whatever. There's basically 3 ways to do it. And this took me a long time to figure out. So let me tell you what I did wrong. So the first thing that I tried to do was actually promote jobs in countries directly on job boards that are specific to, Brazil or Argentina or Chile or whatever. And what I quickly found out is you just can't do that. So in many cases, if you're going to post a job on a job board in a country in South America, and I'll just keep using that as an example, you have to have a tax number that identifies you as an employer in that area. And so I would get, an hour into the process of posting a job in Brazil, and then they asked me for this mysterious number that I'd never heard of. And then after another 2 or 3 hours of internet research and talking to accountants and all that stuff, it turns out that it's like the tax identification number for the organization, proving that it is an employer within that area. And so I was like, okay, well, I can't hire people directly like that by, using job boards and stuff. But then I started talking to people more about the specific details of how to acquire full-time employees in other countries. And there's basically 3 options. The first option is that you pay people under the table. And you, interview them and, you post the job on LinkedIn or something like that. And then you go through the process of the hiring experience. And then at the end, you ask them like what their PayPal address is. And over time, as I, really learned more about these dynamics, I found that was not a very desirable solution for us. And the primary reason for me was that I thought it was an exploitation-driven model, meaning that if you go in and you hire someone in Brazil and you are not paying, into their social support system, and you're not paying, business taxes and all that stuff, if that person gets sick and has to use the nationalized healthcare system, they're taking from the social safety net, but they're not contributing to it. And it's not their fault because, I'd say the vast majority of people who are, working for U.S.-based companies from other countries probably have like a contractor relationship where they're getting paid directly, and it's up to them, if they're going to, how they report their income and all that stuff. But that just didn't feel right to me in terms of either making sure that people had access to the benefits and the quality of life that we would expect of our folks in the Starr conspiracy who are in the United States. But it also didn't feel right to me. It felt kind of almost like a colonial model where you go in and you take resources out of a country without contributing to the country. So I kind of said no to that. And then the second is you can work with what's called an employer of record or a global PEO. It's the same thing. It's just called 2 different things. A global PEO is a professional employer organization. If you've ever worked for a company where your check came from somewhere else, like ADP or Insperity or TriNet or something like that, we have a PEO model in the United States as well. But there are global PEOs or global employers of record. And basically what they do is work with a lot of different clients to create a company that hires employees in various countries around the world. And then they have the same, employee experience that anyone who is, walking down the street and going to, work for a company that was based in Chile would have. And so they're paying into all of the social care systems, all the taxes are getting paid, et cetera. And so, going back to that kind of money thing, for every, dollar that you spend in direct compensation to an employee, depending on what the country is, it can be another $1, $2, or $3 to pay into the social system. And I just think that's the right thing to do without, passing judgment on, one country's social system being better or worse than another, or, the inequity or equity inside those programs. That's the program they have in the country, and I think people ought to pay into it. And then the third option is to open up a subsidiary inside a country. And I did a lot of research on that, and I didn't like it for a couple of reasons. Number one is that it kind of ties you to a specific country, and I wanted to be more agile than that. I wanted to be able to recruit from multiple countries. And the second is, depending on the country, the red tape that's required to create a subsidiary inside another country it can take 1, 2, 3 years just to get a company listed, and it's extremely expensive. It's extremely slow, and you don't have some of the legal protections that you get when you're working with like an employer of record or a global PEO. And so after all the research and, kind of thinking through how our talent strategy kind of maps to our vision and purpose, we really decided that the best way for us to work was with a global PEO who helps us hire people the right way. We find them. We promote the jobs mostly on LinkedIn. We have a very rigorous hiring experience that, takes, in some cases, months to go through. And we also often create all kinds of, kind of cohort groups in there to make sure that, we're including people from different countries and that they are given a fair shake in the process. So that's what we ended up with. It's worked great. I don't know off the top of my head, Brandon, we've hired 20 people or so in the last 6 months, maybe. And I couldn't tell you off the top of my head how many of them are from outside the United States, but it's got to be 30 or 40%, I would think. But I might be a little off on that. Does any of that make sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that gives us a good lay of the land and just some of the ways to approach it and the way that you've taken, given all your research. I agree. The quality of the talent that we found, especially in Chile and some other places, has just been like incredible. And what's cool is they speak multiple languages, which we don't often in America. So I love the perspective. I love the background that a lot of them have.
And it's just cooler, it's just cooler to hear stories that are different than the ones that you would just normally hear every day. And particularly, throughout the pandemic, there was a time in Chile when we were kind of relaxing restrictions in the United States, and folks in Chile could only leave their house like twice a week for, an hour or something like that. And so, not to get too political or anything like that, but I think a lot of times there's been this rush to make an early call that the pandemic is over in the United States because of our very, kind of localized perspective of what might be happening in, our county or our state or whatever. And it was very, useful and insightful for me to hear stories about how bad things were in some other countries where they didn't have, kind of the same level of access to vaccines and stuff like that. And it was just a good reminder that, like, hey, don't talk about the pandemic being over because you might feel it's over for one group, but it is, take Africa, for instance. In Africa, it's like, raging. And folks can't get access to vaccines there. And so we're talking about, like booster campaigns and stuff like that in the United States. And those are doses that could, when you think about, okay, diversity, equity, inclusion, abundance, for whom, right? There are entire continents that are being counted out of, kind of what is available and, what gets hoarded from a scarcity mindset and, what could be done if we had a broader kind of perspective. And so I find that perspective not only interesting and fun and, all that stuff, but incredibly valuable in many ways.
Agreed. We've been talking about a lot of that kind of stuff in some of my other classes, especially my economics classes, just kind of looking at, different ways to analyze it, which has been really helpful for me. Well, I'd like to open it up to the rest of the group if you guys have any questions, and just keep the, just informal conversation going, but I don't want to hog the whole thing.
Okay, I would like to start off with a question. First of all, thank you for your time, Bret. And the funny thing, you were mentioning South America. I'm currently in Colombia, so as you were mentioning, like all these countries, and all of this is possible thanks to technology, and I feel like we've seen the growth of this thanks to the pandemic. And I wanted to follow up on what you were saying, how people from different countries brought in new perspectives, new ways of seeing things, particularly in the creative industry like marketing. But beyond the specific requirements that you list in the job descriptions, what do you look for when hiring new talent from different countries? Like what stands out in particular?
Yeah, it's the exact same thing that we look for in the U.S. The stuff gets pretty deep, but basically I designed a lot of the hiring experience and, just to describe it, real quickly, it starts with a one-way video interview where folks have to answer 5 questions, record themselves, and kind of send it in. And then there's an assessment of emotional intelligence. There's an assessment of cognitive ability. There is a test for if you're applying to be like a writer or analyst, then you have to produce like a 3-page kind of work product that is kind of fake. It's not, we're not using it for clients. We've created some fake scenarios that they have to write to. Then it's an interview with the hiring leader, and then it's a team interview with a hiring team, and then we make the decision. Our entire hiring experience is really based on kind of 2 things, which is locus of control and situational awareness. Those are the 2 things that we're looking for wherever we hire people from. And so in addition to, of course, a level of mastery around the particular area that we're hiring for. But with locus of control, people can have an internal locus of control or an external locus of control. A person with an external locus of control believes that they're a leaf on the river of fate and they're tossed around by, things they can't control. And when something bad happens, they tend to blame it on other folks. And when something, good happens, they tend to think about it in a different way. But I think the, kind of typical example is, someone failed a test. A person who has an external locus of control says, oh, that wasn't on the syllabus. The teacher didn't spend any time, the professor didn't spend any time on that. Oh, my roommate, kept me up all night. And it's just like, reason that they, experience this outcome, but none of it has to do with them. A person with an internal locus of control feels like they're the author of their own destiny. And so if that person fails the test, they say things like, I could have studied harder. I could have, gone to a quiet place so that I could study without distractions, et cetera, et cetera. And whether it's good or bad, they feel like they, played a significant role in making those things happen. So we're looking for someone who has an internal locus of control. And then, the situational awareness stuff is just like, can you tell what's going on and can you predict what's going to happen if things keep going in that direction? So people with low situational awareness are very rarely aware of what's going on around them, but they also can't really project what's going to happen if things stay that way. And people with high situational awareness quickly notice when things are out of place, when things are going wrong or going right, and they can project forward in their minds to what's going to be the outcome if things keep going in that direction. And so I kind of view those things as a 2x2. We're looking for people with an internal locus of control and high situational awareness because they know what's going on. They can figure out what's going to happen if it keeps going that way, and they feel like they have the power to do something about it. And, a person with a low situational awareness and an external locus of control doesn't know what's going on, doesn't know what's going to happen. And even if they did, they wouldn't think they could do anything about it anyway. So it's the exact same thing and folks who come in, our hiring experience from the U.S. go through the exact same process. In fact, usually in a cohort of people that are moving through our hiring experience, it will be balanced. With half of the people being from inside the U.S. and half the people being outside. So it's not like we've got this track of like, okay, here's how we hire people from Colombia and here's how we hire people from Fort Worth, Texas. It's the same hiring experience all the way through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Great explanation.
Again, thank you for the time you took to speak to us today. I have a question kind of in terms of like leading on to the qualities you look for international talent, but how important is prior experience to you for talent? Because, for example, like in Eastern European countries, sometimes they're not able to kind of get real world experience, like while they're students and everything, but they want like a leg to kind of get that experience. So how important is like prior experience?
Great question. And it really comes down to the role. And so I would have to describe a lot of things about the way we work at the Starr Conspiracy, which is very unusual. In short, we have a model where people flow to the work instead of to an org chart. So we're pretty flat. We don't really have departments. We expect people, if you hire somebody who has a strong writing skill, for instance. If there's no writing to be done, then we expect them to flow to other work and keep a full plate. The four basic principles of what it takes to make our model work at the Starr Conspiracy is do excellent work, keep a full plate, finish work quickly, and be an X factor, bring something special to the table. And so that being said, as people flow from, kind of different, types of work to other types of projects and work, you can't go out and, promote a job that, basically doesn't have a label on it. And so we know that we lack, certain levels of capacity to do work at different times. So, if there's not enough people to write content, then we'll go out and promote a position for content. And then during the hiring experience, we go to great lengths to let people know that, okay, that's the front door that you came in through. But when you get here, you can work on anything that you want, as long as, you're flowing to, the work that is represented by your superpower when that work needs to be done. And so it really depends on the position. If it's something like digital marketing, or, something that has kind of like a deep skill associated with it, that takes time to develop, that takes, specific education, and then, some real world experience in terms of like running digital campaigns or something like that, we tend to emphasize a certain level of experience. If it's more of a, kind of like a root skill, position, where, it just requires that, that you have that internal locus of control, that you have high situational awareness, and that you, have good like writing skills or organizational skills or whatever, then, experience is not as important. Now, I will say this. We are growing from a small to mid-size, organization, and we are terrible at training and providing professional resources to folks right now. And there's this creative tension between, basically blocking as much time as we can so that people can get into a deep work state. So not having unnecessary meetings, not having, conversations during certain times so that people can really focus on their work. And that's always in conflict with deep collaboration. So deep work is always in conflict with deep collaboration. And it takes deep collaboration to be able to train people on things that they don't have the real world experience around. And we haven't figured that out yet. And that's one of the things that I'm actively working on right now. And so I believe that when we, kind of solve the case around, how to train and teach and mentor more effectively in our organization, then I think we'll become even less dependent on, prior work experience. Right now, I think it's, most positions are going to say a minimum of 3 to 5 years, very typical. And then we'll make exceptions for certain positions or certain people based on, what their life experience is or their education.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, Bret, can you hear me?
Yep, sure can, Brad.
All right. Thank you for your time again, for taking the time to interview with us today.
It's my pleasure.
Kind of piggybacking off of what you were just saying about those employees that have specialized skills. When you're competing with those bigger brands or those bigger companies when hiring these employees that have specialized skills, such as data science, for example, how has hiring internationally helped alleviate some of this competition or hiring these people, or how has that kind of muddied the waters or complicated things for you guys?
Well, to be honest, we don't have a problem hiring people. And so, now's probably a good time to talk about the reverse mullet. And so the reverse mullet is why we don't have a hard time hiring people. But you guys know what a mullet is, that awesome haircut where it's like, short in the front and like, has a Kentucky waterfall in the back or something like that. The definition of a mullet is business in the front and party in the back. And that's the way most businesses are, right? So there's 3 experiences that are in the value chain of business. There is the shareholder experience, there's the customer experience, and there's the employee experience. And that's just in the direct value chain. Then there's a fourth stakeholder. It's like social good or the social experience, right? So if anybody's watching the show Dope Sick on Hulu, for instance, that's a classic example of where shareholder experience was prioritized over customer experience and employee experience. They literally killed their customers with OxyContin. Purdue Pharma did. And they lied to their employees and put them in terrible positions, et cetera. But they also had a significant impact on society as a whole because of the hundreds of thousands of opioid deaths and basically ushered in a public health crisis. And so part of our vision, so our purpose is to generate abundance, but our vision for doing that is to bring this value chain of employee experience, customer experience, and shareholder experience into more of a balanced ecosystem. And that means the reverse mullet, right? So you put the party in the front and the business in the back, which means that you start by creating the best work experience that you possibly can. And in doing so, that work experience creates the best customer experience because people care and they're going to go the extra mile for customers. And then the shareholder experience is really about being a good steward of the, profit that is generated and reinvesting it in the right ways. And I also think, over time, it has to result in kind of a rebalancing or, a different expectation for what a fair profit is. And this is one of the things that drives me nuts. And I swear I'm going to get to the specific question that you asked, but this is one of the things that drives me nuts. If you are a business owner or a shareholder, whether it's a small business or a large business, there are these metrics and ratios that everyone says are the way things are supposed to be. And so if you're a professional services company, you should be running, at a 30%, margin. If you are a software as a service company, you should be running at a 70% margin, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how all of the, private equity groups, the venture capitalists, the entire, financial complex evaluates whether a company is good or bad, right? It's like how much profit can it throw off? And I think that in many cases, in an effort to try to hit those metrics so that you can, appear valuable in the financial world, it robs from the employee experience and the customer experience. And, I wrote this article the other day about buying a piece of furniture online and trying to assemble it. And I hate doing that, right? But what always happens is I'll lose like a screw along the way and it'll just like fall somewhere and I just can't find it no matter how hard I try. And then I'll realize that, that furniture company put the exact number of screws that you needed in the package, not, one or two extra, right? But everyone loses a bolt or a screw along the way. And then, I kind of think to the context of that decision being made in the, boardroom where someone says, well, if we, reduce this, problem where we're adding these extra screws into the hardware packet, then over the next 5 years, we can make another 15 million in profit. And so, save money on screws. The supply chain is totally fucked right now, et cetera, et cetera. So it makes a really good, financial case for shareholders. But the problem is they don't anticipate the impact on the customer experience of the guy who loses the screw and gets totally pissed off. And every time I look at that piece of furniture now, I'm like, God, what a terrible experience. I'm never going to buy anything from them again because they just didn't put an extra screw in there, right? And then, you also have to think through like how employees are going to get their asses whipped to try to meet these quality metrics of exactly the right number of screws in every hardware pack and all that. And so they're going to burn out their employees. They're going to create negative customer experiences. And eventually that's going to set a fire that comes back to engulf the shareholders and bring the whole thing down. And so it just doesn't make sense to me. So one of the things that we did during the pandemic was advance some really bold experiments in the work experience. So we went to a 3-day weekend. And everyone says, oh, the 4-day work week doesn't work. And well, it's just not true. It does work. But once you implement it, you have to work hard to protect it. And we implemented quiet time blocks of 90 minutes once a day. And it's next to lunch. So effectively you have 2 hours. And, those 2 hours are supposed to be, we're having some issues right now because we're growing real fast of, protecting quiet time. And I'm working on that as well. But that's time to rest or it's time to work or, it's time to, during the pandemic, like in the early days, it's time to order your groceries and Lysol them all down and you put them on the 2 tables before, it's like there's so much stuff that needed to be done. And this notion that you could get it done and still, kind of work like in a regular day structure just didn't make sense. We also have unlimited paid time off, and we encourage people to use it. We have and it just goes on and on and on. And, our vice president of employee experience, her mandate is really like, just think of our people as rock stars, and we're a concierge. And whatever they need, we're hiring the best people in the world. So whatever they need, we make it happen so that they can do what they're really good at. And we don't want them bogged down with, systems burden, having too many software systems that they have to get into and, update information, all that. We don't want them bogged down by management burden and performance reviews and like all that stuff that is just a bunch of meta work that's not actually adding value to customers. And so by stripping away all the things that don't, kind of add direct value to the work that's being done, we were able to create a lot of space to balance that notion of creating a great work experience with still having time to do, kind of great work and, drive a successful business. And so when we find, somebody who's got a deep skill set, it's typically, they're referring to this period right now as the Great Resignation. Everyone's leaving their jobs. And so if we put out a position for, anything, we're getting literally 1,000 applicants. I mean, we have to shut off like the LinkedIn stuff, which is pretty much the only place where we promote jobs. We have to shut that off after like 1 or 2 days because of just the flood of interest that we get. And then if we find somebody who, has that, locus of control and that situational awareness and, the right experience and all that stuff, it's really not difficult to at least get, convince them to take a shot at something that sounds really weird and probably too good to be true. I would say that one of the nuances is that, and it was a really unexpected challenge that we ran into, is trying to explain the way that we work to some folks in various countries. Like, they are incredibly skeptical. One person who is working with us now literally said that her mother was telling her the entire time that it was a scam, that no company works that way. And she didn't really believe it herself until she actually had worked with us a few days. And so she was skeptical the whole time because, just depending on the country or whatever, the way that we work sounds really, really strange. And so, I guess the only nuance to that is, if we're, recruiting in, South America, for instance, which is a good location for us because it's in a similar time zone, so we can kind of integrate people in the flow of work, et cetera. A lot of times their choices are working with one of the few large employers that exist in that country or working for a global outsourced service provider. And so I do think that we also provide a better alternative to kind of what the prevailing opportunities are for people who are highly skilled and or highly educated in their countries. And so I think that, when you find someone who's really super talented in Colombia, for instance, the competition against prevailing work models there is different than it is in the U.S., where, there's a lot of companies you can go to work for. Everybody is trying to hire right now, and it's hard to find people. And so I think that there's a little less competitive pressure in other countries around deep skill positions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect sense. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Bret, I am all the things that you've been talking about with 3-day weekends and some one team things. I don't know if you want to get into all that, but just a lot of the internal processes and the internal structures that you've built within the Starr Conspiracy. It sounds like it lends itself to a really great culture, which I can attest. It is a great culture. Love working there. But I am curious how you maintain that culture when you start to hire internationally, and there maybe international candidates might have different backgrounds, different understandings of things, preferences of things, maybe language barriers.
Yep.
How do you maintain the culture as you're starting to expand more globally?
Well, it brings up the really big question of what is culture. And so, one definition of culture, which I think is limiting in this context, is shared attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs as expressed through, rituals and, stuff like that, that can be very unique, to different countries. That's not really the culture that I think about when I think about culture and the Starr conspiracy. The culture that I want, to have is a place where I want to go to work. I want it to be fun. I want it to be challenging. And I want my work to be valued more than my ability to adhere to, the baseline policies or procedures. Or, Brandon, you know me, I'm not a process guy. And if I have a recurring meeting on my calendar or whatever, it just totally whips my ass. Just the notion that I'm gonna have to show up for the rest of my life, to a meeting at 10 a.m. on Tuesdays. It depresses me so much. And so I want the culture to be almost a counterintuitive culture where people are able to bring their true selves to work. And what I have found is that, and this is not, an international thing exclusively, people who come to the Starr conspiracy, it takes a while before they really feel comfortable bringing their true selves, especially, if they come from, a professional background where they've worked in a very rigorous, kind of management-driven, hierarchical, kind of company. And, especially this happens with me a lot, is people, when I have conversations with them or when I work on teams with them or whatever, they want to be very deferential to me. They want to be very respectful. They treat me differently than they might treat other people. And I always, kind of point to that when it's happening and, say like, hey, I'm just another person here like you. I'm not going to, because I have a tendency to come in and ask people, questions or to help on stuff or whatever. And it can be very disruptive if someone suddenly feels, well, the boss asked me to do this, so I need to now deprioritize all this other stuff that I'm doing and just focus on what Bret asked for. And so I think the hardest part in defending that culture of just allowing people to be themselves, which think about the counterintuitive notion of that, right? A lot of people think of culture as assimilation. And my view of culture is allowing people to bring themselves, and that it's a culture of, kind of authenticity and, radical freedom, right? And so the hardest part of maintaining that is not falling into traditional practices when businesses are growing. Because when businesses are like ours are growing right now, it can throw off a lot of chaos and, a lot of, issues that seem like the best way to solve them would be to, implement a new standardized process or implement a new software system or, implement, something that throws off a bunch of meta work and, administrative burden and, managerial burden and all that stuff. Hey, let's start, specializing. Let's start creating departments. Let's start creating hierarchy. And so the hardest part is that many of these things are true. When the chaos is there, sometimes it does need to, be tamed in order to get the outcome that you need. But doing that without, putting in place a permanent, kind of process or, system or something like that that can really have a dramatic impact on, the chaos. We have an inherently chaotic business model. Which means that, we work on big stuff, we work on small stuff, the demand in the market changes all the time. And you cannot meet chaos with organization. You can't build an org chart that accounts for, innovation. And you can't make innovation the role of like one task force. Innovation has to happen in the flow of work. People have to go to where the work is, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think the hardest part in moments like this is making sure that we don't fall into old patterns of trying to implement processes or hierarchy, or as what's happening now, kind of letting quiet time erode, or finding that, there's a lot of people working on Fridays or something like that. That's why I call it a 3-day weekend, not a 4-day work week, because I want to emphasize that Friday is the weekend. It's not, a work day. Because when people have 4-day work weeks, and it's not specifically labeled that it's a 3-day weekend, then the likelihood that work is going to happen between people, like it's okay if you work every now and then on a Friday, if you're, if that's the time where you can get the most flow and deep work going. Just like, occasionally we work on Saturdays or we work on Sundays in a company that has, a 5-day work week, right? But what's not okay is if it becomes habitual, and if the social pressure starts to emerge of people asking people if they're available on a Friday, and suddenly it's not like, okay, I'm going to roll out of bed at 10, drink my coffee, watch the news, do whatever I do, and then I'm going to, when the time feels right and I'm at peak creativity, I'm going to work on this thing. Now it's suddenly I have a meeting on my calendar, and I have to wear something that I can be on video in, or whatever. And so that's the hardest part in moments like this, is when you have a counterintuitive culture that prioritizes kind of flowing with chaos instead of trying to tame it, is making sure that people don't fall back into kind of traditional management conventional thinking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I did not know that's why you called it a 3-day weekend.
That's why I called it a 3-day weekend.
Sweet.
Yeah, the 4-day work week doesn't work. The 3-day weekend works great. And that sounds like a silly point, but it's actually true. It's my last Lone Star.
I think you touched on it.
Parting thoughts, Brett? Any, recommendations you'd have for business leaders as they're hiring globally, or just thinking about some of the global pressures that you might be facing?
I would just say do it for the right reasons. Don't enter into, an effort to, develop a global workforce because you want to save money. Don't buy the hype, that all these analysts and consultants and HR folks are always throwing out there about, economies of scale and, exchange rates and, all that stuff. And really, I don't think that there should be any other compelling reason to diversify your workforce other than the pure value of the diversification. And so there is something wrong with a business that has to consume labor at reduced rates in order to be successful. And I think it can end up often being predatory and hurts those individuals, but also hurts the countries that they're in. And so I think you have to really think about why, you're interested in, kind of expanding to, a global workforce. And when you make that decision, just understand that, you're dealing with people's lives and you're dealing with, trends that will manifest over time. And, it's like that old cliche, be the change that you want to see in the world. As business leaders, all of us, we have a unique responsibility to think about the consequences of how we run our business beyond just, what is the return on investment for shareholders, et cetera, et cetera. And, I just see entire countries sometimes, develop a brand for being a great place to outsource work, like Vietnam or, something like that. And, for every employer that has like a development group in Vietnam, some of them are, doing it the right way, and they're directly hiring folks and they're creating great opportunities and creating a great work experience for them. And then others are, doing it for all the wrong reasons, and it's more, kind of exploitation driven. Last funny story, I wrote an article on LinkedIn the other day, and it was about, kind of the reverse mullet and, the relationship between shareholder experience and customer experience, employee experience, why you should put the employee experience first. And someone hijacked my comments. It was the chief technology officer from a backpack company called like Ruck or something like that. And go Ruck. and they make like a $400 backpack for like people who do like, they're either preppers or they do like those, mud runs or whatever. It's like a real, kind of hardcore, culture. And this person dropped into my comments and basically said, we totally have a reverse mullet. We have a great time working at GoRuck. And then basically put in an ad for their backpack with links so that you could, click and buy a backpack. And normally, I would be like, what the hell? You can't like advertise in my comments on LinkedIn. You can't do that. But I thought about it for a minute. I was like, okay, I'll bite. And so I wrote back and asked the person to come on my podcast and tell me why their work experience was so great. And of course, I never heard back. But in the meantime, I went out and researched the business. And this was a business that had outsourced production to Vietnam during the pandemic. Their Glassdoor reviews were just awful and consistently, and a bunch of them. And it just showed exactly the opposite of what we were trying to achieve. And if I read their blogs because I'm an obsessive individual. I read the blogs on their website from the CEO, and every blog entry was about the financial performance of the company and how much it costs to produce something versus, in different areas versus how much revenue they make on it. It's like he was releasing financial reports and stuff on his blog. And so this was a company that was obsessed with putting the shareholder experience first and saw the employee experience as an interchangeable part, where if they could get, some level of comparable quality somewhere else, but drive down their labor costs significantly, then, they should go do that. And inherent in that perspective is the notion that it's okay for two people to do the same job and not experience the same quality of life from the work that they do. And so, hey, let's go find a place where people don't have the same high expectations that folks in the U.S. have for a certain job. And the way they did it was a very, kind of like predatory sweatshop, kind of situation. And I think that, that kind of demonstrates why, it's important to think about the consequences in a real human context for making decisions like, working globally or whatever, and to do it with the right intentions of, it can be a win-win, everybody can win. And sometimes it takes a long time to figure out. Sometimes customers have to pay more and you have to increase the price. Sometimes you have to be comfortable with a lower profit. Whatever it takes to create that balance between, the employee and the customer and the shareholders, and also considering the impact on society, it's worth it because it's more sustainable. And I guarantee you that this company, I think it's called GoRuck, I guarantee you they're going to be out of business in a year because they started the fire. And, it's usually employees who get burned first. Sometimes it's customers who get burned first. But eventually that fire engulfs the entire company. And that fire is burning right now. And so, even if you were only prioritizing employee experience and customer experience as a strategy to create sustainable shareholder value, that's still better than, just maximizing shareholder value at all costs. Because it's kind of like, would you take $100 now or would you take $10 every year for the rest of your life? And I know there's a bunch of inflationary issues and all that stuff associated with it. But you take Purdue Pharma, for instance, the makers of OxyContin, they prioritize short-term profits and the shareholder value of the work that they were doing. They were shut down last year. And so if they had been more sustainable in terms of what they wanted to get from the shareholder experience, they probably would have made less money in the short run, but they would still be in business and they would, have made much more money and created their purpose was to cure the world of its pain. Okay. So I can kind of buy into that a little bit, right? I can kind of buy into that. But that was just a purpose that they created as a context for pushing OxyContin. if that was really their purpose and they were really living their purpose and they were balancing the employee experience and the customer experience and the shareholder experience, then they would probably, still be, making a profit. But, they wouldn't have created the opioid crisis, and a bunch of people wouldn't be in prison or dead, dead. So I guess that is my parting thought.
Yeah, it's a big conversation, the stakeholder capitalism or social good, and a lot of the ESG conversations and all that. It's becoming a lot bigger debate, and it's interesting because I have a humanities background and now I'm in business school, and so I'm being trained to look at margins and profitability and all that kind of stuff, and how to put that on a spreadsheet and how to scale that kind of thing. So it's been an interesting tension, which we can cover in a couple of weeks in our wine chats on capitalism.
Well, and I get it. I think that capitalism and social good go hand in hand, and I think that they're often put at odds because capitalism can't exist in a dead planet, or if all your customers are dead, or if there are riots engulfing entire countries, or a pandemic is sweeping obviously around the world. So I think that capitalism in isolation of social good seems like a good idea until the world comes knocking, and that's where we are right now.